2, 4, 6.
I know.
8,
Who are we
10,
missing? Let me know
12,
if we're missing
14,
anybody.
15,
Go back to my high school teaching days.
2 or 3 maybe.
So we want to get started before we get alarmed out. Can you look around and see if anybody is missing? If your neighbors are missing, let me know.
Pretty many.
You have one person missing?
They'll find us.
Maybe they don't want to come back down. Maybe we scared them away. No, I hope not. All right, well, now that you're all back, now that you're all well fed, I hope, got a little bit of a rest, it's time for a pop quiz. Because, you know, secondary school. So is everybody ready for a little test now? Okay. Feel free to, if you would like, we can do this a couple of ways. We could have you just yell out the answer. That's no fun. Or write down you can prepare for trivia tonight. Hopefully you'll all come to trivia. Write down your answers. This is a 5-question quiz. It's very easy. Write down your answers and we'll go back and give you your answers at the end. You can see how correct you are. All right? Everybody ready? Well, some people are still gathering up their paper. Get your pens. We promised interaction. Here's some interaction.
I'm going into this blind, so it's exciting for me too.
He doesn't know the answers either. All right, here we go. So I just want to preface this also by saying that if you choose to take the secondary certificate, and I'll go into it more at the end, it is I'm sorry, I'm looking at my slide realizing it says AAAA instead of AABCD, so just write 1, 2, 3, or 4 on the next slide. I got distracted there. If you choose to take the secondary certificate, it is a question-based online exam. It's either multiple choice, true and false, or fill-in examination, and it's pretty much only that. So this hopefully will prepare you for that as well. Okay, so here we go. First question. Again, ignore the AAAA and just go with the year. When was the Hong Kong Diploma of Secondary Education first awarded? 2012, 2011, 2015, or 2009? You're late. Do you have an excuse? We're going back to school right now. We're taking a little test. We're going to go back to school. I taught high school for all of 2 years, and I never will go back to that. All right, we're going to go on to the second question now. True or false? School candidates and private candidates sit for the same WAEC exam session, or West African Examination Council exam session. And this is true or false? All right, everybody have their answers. Which of these examinations has been phased out? I got the A, B, C, and D correct in this slide. So A, the BTEC Level 3 diploma. B, the Scottish Higher National Qualifications. C, the International General Certificate of Secondary Education. Or D, the Cambridge Overseas School Certificate, which has been phased out. All right. Next one, another true and false. High school diplomas from the United States of America do not indicate academic achievement. True or false? This is not up for discussion with your peers. Take an answer. We're not cheating today. Yes. An academic, or so the high school diploma from the United States does not indicate the academic achievement. So the qualitative assessment of the student's performance. Have you come to a collective decision, Italy? All right, we'll move on. Final question. Which of these countries does not have 12 years of primary plus secondary education? Zimbabwe, Nepal, Saudi Arabia, or Jordan? Now, I will say this, as you're coming up with your answer. When the secondary certificate examination is taken, it is an open book test. So that means that we encourage and expect any of the test takers to use resources at their disposal, other than their friends, Italy.
To be clear, this is the TAICEP.
This is the TAICEP Secondary Certificate.
Certification that one would get in order to have as a professional credential as you move through the stages of the exam.
Yeah, and to be clear, it's not certification, but a certificate. So it's not like allowing you to do anything. It doesn't give you access to anything except accolades and a fancy ribbon at the next conference. It's a professional development certificate. I'm gonna tuck those back in there. Okay, so are we ready for our answers now? So let's go back. All right. Anybody know when was the Hong Kong Diploma of Secondary Education first awarded? Just shout it out.
No penalties for wrong answers. That's the beauty of this kind of quiz.
I might know why, but I don't know the year.
You know why, but not the year?
That's
Okay,
even better.
that's pretty good. That's why?
Because Hong Kong was British first, and then it was handed over to the Chinese, and then they were kind of free for some time until China got them over there. So I just need to pick up which one would be the year in which they could actually use it.
Excellent. Yeah. So that's a really good reason, right? So if you can do the math to figure out exactly when, do you have a guess as to what year? Go ahead. A is correct. A is correct. All the A's. No, it's 2012. 2012. Did anyone have 2012 as their wild guess? It was a guess, but it was an informed guess because you thought about all of the political and other circumstances surrounding that particular credential, right? So that's great. That's the point of understanding sort of the contextualization. All right, so true or false? School candidates and private candidates sit for the same West African Examination Council exam session. Anyone? True, false?
50-50 chance.
It's false. It's false. And you wouldn't necessarily know unless you saw a certificate from a private candidate, but one is a November, December session, and one is a June session. And so if you see the June session, it's a school candidate, and you see that, I think it's November. December session. That's indicative that it is a private candidate, not someone who went through a school system.
Which isn't to say that it's different exams. It's just a different session.
Yeah.
May, June, November, December.
It's May, June, November, December.
One, isn't that November, December intended for rewrite?
Intended for what? I'm sorry.
Rewrites. So
No. It's intended for private candidates. From my understanding, that rewrites might take it, but my understanding is it's intended for private candidates.
in any case, I think you'll get the indication on the certificate that that the student was a private candidate, just like on the GCEs, it would say, I believe.
It does. If you
Yeah.
go into the scratch card verification process, it will say private candidate, or it will say rewrite. Like, you'll know that the student did it as a rewrite test versus as a private candidate.
But it makes sense to me that those resits would be in that same
Yeah, it makes sense to
period.
me too. I don't
It's
know.
just that the private ones don't take it during the May, June.
So that credit current is similar to the European credit current. Now, most of the candidates will write in May, June, with intent that they will try to further their studies in any of the European countries. Now, if private candidates, they write in November, which academic calendar will they follow when they want to further their studies?
The private candidates are candidates who are individuals not going through a school system-based learning process. So they may not be following a traditional calendar other than it's like an equivalency for them, usually it's older students or much younger students. So they may be taking that session knowing that it takes an extended duration of time to get the results back and get the official certificate. So they may be planning, take the exam in November, December, but still follow that West European or American academic calendar, but like they're looking ahead. They're giving themselves, because if you take the May, June exam, I forgot about that. That's a long, there we go. Like, wow, that was, if you, whew, my ears are ringing. If you take the May, June exam, thinking that you're going to have admission for a September enrollment period, there very frequently is not enough time to get the results back, in time to get your visa appointment, get the visa, go through that whole process, right? So what I've seen is students taking the November, December just to buy themselves some time. But good questions. Thank you for bringing that up. Okay. Which of these examinations has been phased out? Wait, all right, so I heard BTEX, I heard B, Scottish Higher National. D is correct.
Overseas, right?
The Cambridge Overseas School Certificate has been phased out. And if I'm wrong and the other ones have, I don't think the other ones have been, right? No, the other ones are still active.
Yeah, they're still good.
Oh, gosh. The Cambridge Overseas School Certificate,
Well, yeah,
I'm going to give that one to him.
The Cambridge Overseas Examinations Syndicate was in charge of administering the GCEs overseas, and it was one of the official examination boards, along with the Southern Board and the ACA and all those other boards. And now the name of the qualification that replaced it is something along the lines of the, Cambridge International Certificate of Education or something. In fact, I could look that up while we're doing the next question, because I can't remember the exact name.
Yeah.
It's now referred as Cambridge International.
Now it's Cambridge International, but it's not the Overseas School Certificate. It's Cambridge International Secondary.
Is Cambridge International either you do your O levels and a subsidiary or A level? Because now they offer mostly in most of the global countries.
Yeah, but it's like the IGCSE. It's
IGCSE, IGCSE-AS, IGCSE-A.
yeah, that's what it is. So it used to be the Cambridge Overseas School Certificate, and now it's incorporated within the IGCSE. They've moved the I into the IGCSE instead of just GCE, and then the Overseas Schools.
Now, it's Cambridge International Qualifications. CIQ is the overarching body, and then you have the Cambridge Assessment International that actually administers the exams. I can't remember the exact name of the exam itself when you see it.
The key with that one is that understanding if you have a student from a number of years ago who presents that, it's not that it's an invalid qualification, it's just that you shouldn't have a student from this year presenting that. You should have a student from 10 years ago presenting it.
So if I understand correctly, this was the international highest school qualification from Canada, is that correct?
The Cambridge board,
Yeah.
yeah,
Comparable to the IGCs.
correct.
Okay, so, and A-levels?
They used to administer both, so they did O-levels and A-levels, and now I think they do the...
Now they do the GCE and the GCEA, yeah. There's been a lot of transition in and around the British boards and what they're called and how they're testing. I mean, they're really, to me, they seem to be the same, but with just different names. Okay, so true or false, high school diplomas from the United States do not indicate academic achievement. It's true. They do not indicate any level of academic achievement. They just simply say, you've achieved it, you've graduated. But they don't indicate any kind of assessment or quantitative, any kind of quantitative.
No honors, no verbal system of qualitatively saying how the student did.
A high school diploma is a high school diploma, whether you've gotten it from, whether you have AP credits or you get it from.
Honors?
Honors diploma,
Yeah.
sometimes.
Sometimes,
Yeah.
yeah.
But
Generally speaking, there's no format to a high school diploma, so I could even say that.
Sometimes we did receive diplomas from, certificates from candidates from the United States, and they did say next to certain subjects with honors, so.
Next to certain subjects is not a diploma, it's a transcript.
You meant the diploma itself?
The diploma itself, yeah, I guess technically it could say honors.
A generic honors diploma, though, would probably imply that they followed a specific honors program.
Yeah.
Maybe not that they achieved honors, so as to not make a distinction between students who did okay and students who did very well. So I think it probably refers to the program they followed. But yeah, there's always going to be these little exceptions, which is good why we have people out there to
question.
chime in, because otherwise,
Right.
the information doesn't get shared.
Yeah.
That's TAICEP.
It's really just a matter of they've reached that benchmark, right? The high school diploma is you've got the benchmark, but it doesn't tell you how you achieved getting that benchmark. Okay, last one. Which of these countries does not have 12 years of primary plus secondary education? Zimbabwe, Nepal, Saudi Arabia, or Jordan? Any guesses?
Before I give my answer,
Before you correct me, is what I'm getting from this.
is that 12 years of basic education, that is the question referring to 12 years of basic education, or what? Because
12 years from when they start the first grade until basically the matriculation.
The education system prior to university level.
Yeah.
That's 15 years, isn't it?
So Zimbabwe, I believe, is Form 7 or grade 7 plus a 2-year lower secondary plus a 2-year. So yeah, 7 plus 4 is what I'm assuming they want out of the answer to this one.
So it's
Zimbabwe
11.
doesn't have a grade 12 as far as I know today. Is there an exception?
They're all looking at me.
no, I think the principle of the question is the problem says it does not have 12 years of primary and secondary education. So in our understanding, we thought maybe it could be lesser than that, 12 years.
What is less?
The level of studies is like from primary to high school.
Yeah.
So, all right, so if I had said one of these countries does not have 12 years of secondary education, the answer would be none of them, right? Because none of them have secondary. We talk about primary education, we talk about secondary education, right? So how would you phrase the question other than putting primary and secondary? I'm curious because I need to know, because how would you phrase the question so that you understood it?
Now it makes sense when now you combine the primary and the secondary.
So do you think I should put the word combined?
Yes.
12 years of combined primary plus secondary? This is the certificate program, and we're always refining the questions to make sure they're understood by individuals from all around the world with all different levels of, and backgrounds of English, cultural English.
I would absolutely put combined.
This is a very valid, yes, put combined, okay. Changing that right now. And I'm even gonna highlight it. Yes,
So going back to the US question,
Yeah.
you also be able to add equality.
yes, thank you.
Because I was struggling even as having my diploma myself, academic achievement. I was questioning, all right, I was asking, do I have access to tertiary education or I don't have access? Because I was going back and forth and what am I looking for here?
Right, but it doesn't show any academic achievement.
So it might be.
It doesn't show a qualitative indicator of academic achievement. The fact that you graduate from high school and get a diploma represents 12 years of academic achievement,
Okay,
right?
all right.
So it's a
Valid.
It's just a suggestion.
No, it's a good one. It's a good one. Again, it's all, when we develop these, there's a small committee, which I will put another plug in. If anyone here is interested in becoming a part of this certificate subcommittee, it's a nice long title. We are a subcommittee of the Professional Development Committee of TAICEP. And we meet a couple times a month. We have a great group. We are a wonderful group of people, and we would love to have another member or two join us because we are losing some folks this year. And so this is important. We're all, we can only write these questions based on our own perspectives. So you would say that this should say high school diplomas from the United States of America do not indicate qualitative academic achievement or quantitative?
Qualitative.
Quantitative, the numbers.
Oh, see, I was.
It also doesn't give your GPA or averages or.
That's
right.
where I thought you were going on this, the grading performance.
Right, grading performance, that's quantitative.
No,
Yes, that's math.
quality.
Qualitative is sort of the overall generalization. It's like when you do qualitative research, you're doing interviews and talking to people. And quantitative is the hard data.
But that's not, I understand your point, but I don't think that's how we use qualitative in the international.
So am I going to confuse it more?
Maybe. We'll take a flyer on that.
We'll pass on this one. We'll move on. We're moving on now.
Mini revolution at the
Oh
table.
my gosh. No, I mean, it's important, but maybe we should move on. Yeah. All right. So we're going to move on in the presentation too. Now that we've got you all fired up and ready to fight, this is where the fighting comes in, folks. We're going to start talking about fraud detection and best practices, and I'm going to turn it over to Dave.
Yeah, well, this is always a popular system because everyone wants to be a detective, and we frequently get opportunity to do that kind of work here when we have documents that come to us that don't look right. So we'll just go through what fraud is, what we can do to work against it and that kind of thing. So we'll go, yeah. So fraud basically means presenting something that's purported to be one thing that it isn't. So we have situations where documents come to us. Well, I'm going to skip forward if I can go forward to.
Just hit the down.
Yeah, I'm going to get into.
Tell me which one you want to get to.
When I get, here we go.
All right, I'm going to skip the slides a little bit.
I'm just give you a second to go back. I'm going to go back and just go in order.
Never mind.
So basically,
Wait, no, is this right?
I'm
Okay.
on the tree. Yeah,
All right.
we're on the tree of fraud.
Apologies, everybody.
So that's my fault. I just got ahead of myself. The right side of the tree graphic here, where document forgery, document tampering, diploma mills are the kind of things that you see often in admissions and records. On the left side of the tree, we see things that pertain more to the academic function of an institution, perhaps. As we've said before, the advent of electronic technology and the internet makes it so much easier to produce fraudulent documents. Going to go down.
You're going to tell me where you're going.
Going just down one.
Okay.
So we have to detect the fraud. We have to see if we can verify documents, and we have to do some kind of follow-up afterward. Sometimes the follow-up at an institution will be first dealing with the institution that purportedly issued the document to say, you know, we received this document which we've ascertained isn't real, or you've ascertained isn't real, and the student has applied to this institution. Sometimes we share it with other institutions. But we'll go through these basic steps. It's very. You used to be able to just look at a document that somebody had altered, and you'd see that part of the background of a safety paper was the lines that were there to make sure that people knew it wasn't a copy, were obscured, or there was a whiteout area with things typed in. Now it's so much more difficult because you can just take any software and start dropping things in proper fonts
I just altered some PDFs for us to look at later from documents, and I was able to just delete someone else's name and put my own name in there if I wanted to in about 30 seconds.
Okay, so I've gone on to the next one here. So you have several different types of altered or fraudulent documents that you might see, and one category is the altered document, where you have an authentic document that has been changed, either to add somebody's name, or that isn't the document holder, or to improve performance. You have documents that have been outright forged or fabricated, so they don't relate to anything that ever really happened to anyone. It's just a fake, basically a truly fraudulent document. Then you have two kind of manufactured documents. The one we won't deal with so much here would be something from a diploma mill, where it represents something, but that something isn't really anything. The other part of these manufactured documents that's more important is the university issued document with proper university seals and proper signatures, which has been done with the participation of criminal element within the school, and we see this happen quite a bit, where somebody's been paid to make a document on the proper letterhead, and we've also you're aware of the thefts in forms that occur for examination councils or whatever. So
yeah, I was going to say more
yeah.
for examination
Right.
councils when you have a large batch of examination council results that are fake or unreliable.
Yeah.
There was a great session, I don't remember if it was the most recent session on Russia, if there was a webinar, but there was another one that talked about the number of attestat certificate papers that were actually sold and stolen and tracking it down. So it does happen at the secondary level. It absolutely does. I would say it's probably not as, people aren't buying a high school diploma or a secondary school diploma like the diploma mill, like you were talking about, as much as they would a university level. But the fraud is still happening at the secondary level, 100%.
And yeah, we'll go on.
Yeah.
So the education is so important, especially in developing countries where means to improve one's lot are difficult to obtain. But it's so important that the stakes are very high in having a certain qualification. So if you don't have that qualification and you still want to do something, you're doing it the wrong way. But there's a lot of pressure on people to come up with documentation in these credential-based societies.
And then once you migrate, that level of human capital that is tied into your education level. So once you've migrated for whatever reason, whether it's voluntary or involuntary migration, improving that secondary level credential can give you access and opportunity to further education, opportunities for employment, opportunities for skilled, licensed employment or labor. And so there is a huge market value tied into secondary level education. Even if we just think about the universities, it's also tied into the secondary. And it's a major issue.
It's why we see it so much in the secondary, because people that have made their way to a certain country have to come up with a document that may or may not be real. So could you go advance to?
So not this one,
not the map.
Yeah.
This is where I wanted to be before, was the basic types of documents. So individual fraud, altered documents, the manufactured documents, and then we'll go to the purchase document. As most of you know, you can go online and buy a credential from any university, and it may look better or worse depending on the person who's doing it. But I was looking around, Googling things, and I entered the words counterfeit transcript for a Google search, and these are the things that came up when I searched, and a better word would have just been faked. People, in their little Google advertising keywords will often just have fake transcript or fake diploma if they want to sell you one. So they're very clear about who their audience is and what they're producing.
A key to this also is, we were talking earlier about other pathways to university education and university studies. And so one of the issues is, if an individual does not have secondary level education at all, and they can't prove it, they don't have any documentation for nefarious reasons, they're not a legitimate, they don't want to go through the process of finding those alternative means of validation, and they want to purchase a university level fraudulent document, right? Someone said earlier, oh, but if they've already got a higher level education, we don't need to even worry about the secondary when we're doing an assessment or an evaluation. This is one of the reasons why someone might purchase a university level document, right? Because they're thinking, nobody's going to ask me about my incomplete secondary if I've already got the higher level diploma. Just something to consider.
Okay, so we'll go back to the map. Before we do this, I don't know, some of you may or may not be aware, there was a recent spate of original documents coming that students were hand carrying, purported to be from University College London. And in part due to the pandemic, University College London has only been issuing official documents electronically for the last year and a half. So people ended up with these very good-looking, original-looking documents, which were fake by virtue of actually existing on paper and having been carried into an admissions office or an evaluation agency, rather than, you know, the agency being aware that this school only issues electronically. And luckily we can now email registrars and people at all these institutions and find out exactly what they're, you know, you can even make phone calls and if the time zone is right. And or if you want to stay up in the middle of the night.
The pandemic has done a lot for that digital verification process of fake documents, because as Dave was talking about earlier, you know, it used to be when you're looking at trying to determine if something is not real, you know, you had to feel the paper, look at the paper, judge the size of the paper. You know, if for example, someone were to present an original transcript to me, and it was on an 8.5 by 11 size piece of paper, which is only used in the United States, in Canada, maybe, certainly not used in most other countries of the world, I would have reason to suspect it, because it wasn't the A2 size paper, right? This is a slightly different shape of paper. If you know, the stamps and seals. So there was a really good intermediate period of time when documents were being transmitted electronically and there was still a lot of vagueness. The pandemic did everyone a little bit of good in that it has made it much easier. Everyone is more aware of the digital documents and more able to access verification for those digital documents. So that, if we're going to look on the bright side of anything, I look on the bright side of that. I find that it is people are much more aware and make it a lot easier to do digital transmission.
Right. So moving to our map, this is not a map indicating graphically places where educational fraud happens only. It's really from a survey, a world survey from the Transparency International Corruption's Perceptions Index, which was 5 years old now. But they ranked just countries in terms of fraud and the existence of fraud, the prevalence of fraud rather. So New Zealand came in number 1 on the list as the least fraudulent system within a country of doing anything, and Somalia came in at 180 at the end. Greenland didn't rate at all. They just have a blank white space up there. But this is not to say
a lot of jokes could be made.
This is not to say that we don't see fraud from countries that aren't, you know, bright red or medium red on this list, right? You do all the time. The last fraudulent document I had occasion to verify was a South Korean 2-year program in architectural technology at a school that just didn't have that program. The document looked very good, but you know, it wasn't something that we were going to accept anyway because it hadn't come directly from the institution. But we were sent a first copy of something, and I just, you know, you have to look the program up. And we'll talk about that kind of in our due diligence slide.
And the other thing I want to say about this slide is that it goes back to that cultural context as well, right? Our perception of fraud is different, maybe, from country to country and culture to culture. So, there you go. You got it. That's it going up.
I'm just going to.
So, you know, what I think of as fraud might be seen in another cultural context as supporting each other. You know, the U.S. is a very individualistic society, so we see any sort of group collaboration as maybe cheating, right? Fraudulent. So, and the best example of that is we were just taking that little quiz, right? And I was teasing our Italian friends about working together. They were working together. I could see that as you know, collaboration in a negative sense, and it could be seen as collaboration in a very positive sense, helping and supporting. So the context of fraud, And I'm not talking about like I changed the document or, you know, I purchased something. That is definitely fraud, no matter what, right? But thinking about the purpose or thinking about how grades might be where they are in that sense of fraud is just good to have in the back of your minds.
It's often there's pressure put on an applicant to produce fraudulent material just because the documents may not be available anymore for them to get, and it doesn't have to be an asylum issue. It can be just be a institutional kind of bureaucratic nightmare situation where you really can't get it sometimes. We always hear that you can't get it, and many times you know you can. But there are instances, and this is where, you know, having these alternative pathways that we were talking about before with the interviews and ways to ascertain whether a person has achieved a certain level or a document, you know, in the absence of documents is very important. Kind of ironically, some of the countries that we do associate with fraud in terms of secondary documents have very good online verification systems. So it's almost easier to verify a document from some of the problem countries. I'm thinking just, you know, Nigeria for one with the WAEC exams. Very easy to get that information now. It's easy for them to get it, to get the, you know, the passcode little chit that gives us the information that we need to go. So the bottom line is that fraud can occur in whatever country you're dealing with. And now we go down.
Yeah, but I think it's, where's my mouse? There it is. It got stuck in one of the slides. You want to be here?
Okay,
Is
yeah,
that where you
sure.
want to be?
So we have a spectrum, if you will, of documentation where, if we see a document that's in the proper format and is consistent with things we've seen before, and some of you in your offices may have access to sample documents, or a national database even of documents that will help you determine authenticity. That's very important. But, if you've been able to confirm the authenticity of a document using, reliable resources and everything looks fine, you kind of got the green light, as we would say. If you're not sure, and there's a problem, like everybody should be kind of programmed by now to subtract 18 or 17, whatever number of years from your diploma date or your certificate date to get it. 2012, that person better have been born, somewhere near 1994, or 2006, they should have been born sometime, near 1988 or whatever. The birth date, I think, is still the most important thing we have in terms of just right away determining if there's something's out of sequence. But if you're not sure, obviously the procedure is consult colleagues and experts for help. I guess we should, TAICEP has the wonderful, what's the online question thing called?
There's an online, on the TAICEP website, if you're a member, there is a list of online verification sources and sites that you can access. It's not comprehensive, meaning... But
also an opportunity to ask questions of your colleagues.
Oh, there's a gaggle, yes.
Yeah, the gaggle.
There's an email forum.
So you can go to the TAICEP website
and
find those answers, and you'll have hundreds of people looking at it sometimes,
right?
And getting answers in real time, practically.
And seeing, there was actually recently a whole thread about Pakistani documents. You were involved in that, weren't you, Rachel? Yeah. Can you sum up better than I could?
So the issue was there's a certain region in Pakistan, in Gujranwala, where students were submitting fraudulent higher secondary certificate examination results, year 12 results. And how we first encountered it was a student submitted their certificate. We went on the board website for Gujranwala to verify the scores. They pulled up the same exact score, same roll number with a different name. So that immediately red flags. So we emailed the students, we couldn't verify your scores online. If you want us to move forward, you have to get the exam board to send us your score at that some form of verification, because we will not move forward with you at this point with this. You don't want to tell a student they're accused of fraud until you're 100% sure of the situation. So the student immediately replies back with a West evaluation, which is obviously fraudulent. And it was for the Immigration and Refugee, something organization for Canada. But it had equated the higher secondary certificate to 2 years of university education in the United States. So it had equated the year 10 to a high school diploma and the 2 years to an associate's degree, which isn't right. And the format was off, the signatures were off. So I immediately contacted Wes, let them know, and then emailed the student back and said, no, we didn't get this through our official Wes Access portal, so we're not going to take this either. So then the student got someone to send me an email impersonating the COO from a Gmail account from Wes, like 2018 at gmail.com. And then the student submitted a fraudulent IELTS certificate that we couldn't verify online. So, and then this happened 7 more times, same situation.
So the IELTS is the English language assessment.
English language assessment, yes. So everything was fraudulent. We reported it to Common App. The students had all of their applications to this university withdrawn. And then when I mentioned it to TAICEP, a lot of other, one university I think said they had 60 students from that region, but they caught fraud. So I was hoping that it would have just been last admission cycle, but we got an email this time around, so it looks like it's still happening. So pay close attention if you get any applicants from that region.
And there was an explanation saying, well, they might reuse the roll number.
They do in Ethiopia, but I haven't seen that in Pakistan.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, this brings up the specter of email phishing of both institutions and credential evaluation agencies also, getting inundated with emails with people bearing fraudulent documents. Luckily, things are getting easier for verification, except in countries where things, have basically broken down due to various conflicts within these countries. But
Want this slide?
yeah, I think we're on the electronic. Yeah, thank you. So just going through this, you're all aware of the systems in your home countries. We have some listings later at the end of the presentation, but the importance of the electronic verification tool is that in theory it's less hackable, to use just an electronic term than the old paper documents used to be. But usually set up by a national or regional framework, administered centrally, from one place. It takes a long time. India's been trying to figure out their central depository of academic records now since the new education plan was announced several years ago, and it's going to take a while. There are a couple different players in play. Eventually we're going to get there, but it takes a long time. But it's a great place. It's a great way for students rather to store records, especially in areas where physical documents are prone to being lost or stolen, or if you don't want to have to go back to your university for political reasons to prove that you actually did your work. If that's in an electronic locker, supposedly, that would be less likely to be lost. So we don't have them across all countries, but I believe that the movement is definitely toward having, more electronic verification. Some countries aren't going to have them in the foreseeable future. So you have to expect that each document you look at is potentially not what it purports to be. You have to. I just tell people to really look at it as if you look at it like we were looking at the question about grade 12s versus grade 11 in the quiz. It was clear to us what we're seeing because we've seen that slide, but it wasn't clear to everyone else. The same thing goes with, by the time you've seen your 10,000th secondary school certificate from Gujarat State or something, you know exactly where your eye wants to go. You're picking out the exam date in March, you're picking out the issue date in June, you know exactly where you want to go, and you can conceivably just miss things, whether it's a birth date discrepancy or the fact that you know, this line doesn't look right or whatever. So you really have to try to look at it with innocent eyes each time, which is very difficult. It's like correcting your own paper. You can find the mistakes in your friend's paper, but you can't see the errors because
you can't see the typos until after you've hit publish.
Because you remember doing it correctly, not that you did it incorrectly.
Right.
So, you just if you'll have a way to review things that you can apply in each case, you know, checking the birth date, checking the status of the institution, checking the this is more of a post-secondary thing, but what programs are offered. But it also, you know, applies to secondary. If you can go to the outside sources and find sample documents, either online that a ministry's provided or within your own databases, or ask a colleague, send it out to the gaggle. You can send it out to you know, any number of what we used to call those listserv user groups now that have email streams to combat fraud.
Yeah, take advantage of the connections that you're making here at TAICEP. Take advantage of interagency collaboration and just getting to know people and getting to know the resources.
I'd just be interested, like, how many, you know, cases of fraudulent documents would you see within a given month, let's say? Does anyone have like more than 5, more than 10 in a month, or is it just the odd thing, you know, once in a while?
Yeah.
More than 5, 10, not unusual. Actually, we assign and we also work with fraudulent documents on our unit, and I work with the region Middle East, and for national reasons, I mean, we had a big immigration wave in 2015 and conflict and all what that entails. So actually we come across it quite often.
Yeah. And you would expect that certain areas would have more just because of the number of refugees coming in.
The quantity, so you will find there. The majority, of course, is okay, but it's not unusual. I mean, we come across that. We report, I mean, when we have it confirmed, we report to the police. Sometimes we participate.
You report it to the police, so it becomes a criminal situation.
Yes, we participate in court.
Yeah. Is that because the individuals are asking for evaluations for a very specific purpose, that it becomes a criminal situation?
Well, it becomes criminal because they ask us to, since they send in a fraudulent document to us, which they wish us to certify the contents of this document, meaning that they are stating something false to us, and they ask us to, so to speak, wash over the document. We need the confirmation from the issue institution that the document is fraudulent in order to make a report to the police. Otherwise, we can't do it. We can dismiss the document. If we don't get the confirmation that the document is false, we can't.
Right. That's
for obvious reasons.
Sure.
And ENICNAR people that have access to those databases, in those officials in those countries have the fraud scan and the fraud doc program, where there is a database now that's being kept. Unfortunately, somebody such as myself, I can't access it, but I know that it exists for European countries to be able to look at documents, and I think they keep a compendium of the fraudulent ones, if I'm not mistaken.
Are those only confirmed fraud, or are those, like you were saying, that
I would say it's probably
unconfirmed fraud?
I would say they probably would have to be confirmed, but I don't
You're
know.
saying yes,
I've
so
never been able to see it.
Yes, it's confirmed fraud.
Yeah, okay.
So any that only confirmed, so any that you haven't heard back from the issuing institution that says, yes, it's definitely fraud, you can't put those into that database. Do you exchange, so we talked about the gaggle and the experience, learning about them, do you exchange that information? No. Nobody's talking about those.
You mean the exchange between academic
Yeah.
centers?
Like, oh, hey, we received a potential fraud document from this country. Have you seen any as well?
The database itself is a place where we share information. So the centers from numeric networks who have access to that automatically can check whether the document they receive is fraudulent or not, because we have some filters for fraudulent documents and diploma means, so you can check also the institution or the by country.
Sure. So you can search through
Yeah.
a bit. That is fantastic.
The only thing I neglected to mention, I was going to say that, I've been doing this since 1987, but I wasn't aware until I did a presentation for the Jamaican Universities Council that all the time the subjects on the Caribbean Examinations Council examinations for Jamaica and West Indies are always alphabetical, the listing. So if you see physics above mathematics on the list as you read down, that's wrong. It doesn't happen any other way, because I went back and said, well, I'm going to check everything I have, all the West African, exam, the old advanced or the senior certificates, the A-level certificates, the O-levels, things were in all manner of order, it's just one of these things where you can learn something that you think you maybe should have known decades ago, but that's just one thing about being familiar with the format of documents is that it really does come down to some insider knowledge that if you don't have it, you've got to try to see if it's written down in any of the older publications or any of the online things.
Do you want to go through these, or do you want to go through this, or do you want to skip to this?
Oh, yeah. How much time? How are we on time?
We have 45 minutes.
For not for fraud,
For
though.
finishing this, and then this.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I think we can just go up to the verification ones.
To this, or sorry?
We'll skip ahead. We kind of already talked about fraud at
We're
your
going to
institutions.
we have some, you'll see it in the presentation when you have access to
Yeah.
it, but there are some examples of how to check. But then we're going to go to here, because we would really like to hear some of your stories. I'd love to hear the most bizarre fraud experience that you've had, the strangest, most ridiculous fraud finding. Anyone want to share?
This is kind of a general problem that we have, and it's with the Common App. And I don't know if anybody else has this problem.
So let's explain what the Common App in the United States is.
It's like
Way, it's almost like UCAS. It's a way for U.S. high school, actually anyone, to apply to U.S. universities. It's an agreement that's signed by the universities that they'll accept the data coming out of this organizational application.
And the issue is, in order to submit the application, a student has to put the contact information of their high school counselor. No problem if you're a U.S. student. Every U.S. high school typically has a high school counselor. A lot of international students don't know what that means. They don't have a high school counselor, or they don't want to put someone from their school down. And there is no verification done on Common App's end at all. You can put anyone's email. You can make a Gmail account yourself that just goes to your inbox, and you can put that in. You can put your dad, your brother, your cousin, anybody. And then that person will then get an email from Common App asking them to upload official transcripts of documents. So we have all the time. I will open up a Common App school report, and it'll be Jessica Arnold, 47@gmail.com. And it says official transcript. No, I can't take that. And then it starts this knockdown, drag out 20 email argument with student. Because they're like, well, that's my counselor. You just need to take that. No, not. But it says official, because I can't go in and change it in the system, because it wasn't uploaded by anyone on our end. So I physically can't change the title of it from official. So the student keeps emailing saying, it says official in the system.
But this application has now gone to 20 different schools.
Exactly.
So they're playing the numbers game. They're betting that at least one of the 20 different schools is not going to go through and do any due diligence and track down whether or not that institution exists, whether or not that person exists, whether or not that transcript looks the way it should, whether or not the exam scores are legitimate, or just really anything. And so because of the way the Common App works and the application process to U.S. universities, it just simply becomes well, let's see who I can get this by, because once I'm in, it doesn't matter, I'm in. And then once I have the U.S. degree, the undergrad degree, I can get into a master's program. And again, that's just, it becomes of the value of what higher education means and the education and opportunities that it opens up.
Yeah, I have 25 attestats from Uzbekistan with perfect scores, 5s all the way down, perfect, that I can't verify in any way. I keep telling the students, you gotta pay a basis evaluation company, you have to get the exam board to send it to me, Education USA, or your school can send it from a verified source. Some way I can mail us a copy that we can verify, and I get so much pushback, and so I don't know what to do with them.
Do you look up the school? Does the school actually exist?
The school actually exists.
Mm-hmm. And is there any contact information? You can't find any contact information about them.
They're it's like 7th public school.
7th public school on the corner of
Yeah.
9th and 12th Street. Yeah.
And if you also don't have or you can't type it as well, it's hard to find any information. So I'm sure some of these students are fine, but I'm not sure how to.
So that's the numbers game too, right? Because they're betting that it takes a lot of time.
And since
This is a time crunch process, probably for all of us. We all have so many in our, inbox. They're piling up. And the bet is on how much time will that person spend to determine whether or not my documentation is legit, or if there's a slight tweak and I just moved all of those, all of those 4s in Croatia to something a little higher and better. Is anybody ever going to check?
So you have to protect your institution basically from your own fatigue, because the fraudster, as we would say, the person who wants fraudulent documents to be accepted by your institution has all the time in the world. Kind of like they say about alligators and small children. All they have to think about is how to screw up your life. They only have one thing, that they need to worry about. So the being able to say no and being able to just do your process and not accept anything, because everyone does have a story, and there are valid stories out there competing with the false stories. So you have to.
And you're competing with your institutions too. So if you are in a decision-making position at your organization or institution, it's very easy to just lay it down and say no, right? But if you're an individual who's not in that decision-making position at your organization or at your institution, and you have doubts or you have concerns about the policies, what do you do about it? Who do you go to and say, I think this is fraudulent. I've done some research. I'm pretty sure it's fraudulent. But you have a management position telling you it doesn't matter. Go ahead and get it through for whatever reason. it can be mentally exhausting for those of us who are doing the evaluations, right? Because we're learning about all of this in these sessions, and then we go home and we're like, okay, I'm going to do it. I'm going to catch all of these fraudulent ones. I'm going to be super diligent. And then you suddenly have 30 files in your queue, and they're all due tomorrow because you were at a conference all week. Right? And so now you're playing catch up, and you're trying to tell someone. So it can be a mentally exhausting environment to talk about fraud, to discuss it, to try to push for fraud policies in your organization or institution. You know, this is a learning environment for all of us. Like, what do you do about it? What's your policy? How do you deal with fraud within your organizations or institutions? Not a theoretical question, honestly. How do you deal with it? Do you know what your policies are at your organizations? I mean, obviously, so we heard Sweden will criminalize and prosecute.
We don't report them.
You don't report them?
No, we just don't admit them.
You just don't admit them?
We have a specific denial decision, which means they can't apply again.
Okay, that's different than a regular denial then, right? They're denied and blacklisted. Okay. What do you do? You don't react. You just.
Yeah, I reject, but the student never hear.
You never hear back from them again. Does anyone just let it die the death of natural attrition?
We know the names and the institution.
Yeah.
We're obliged to reply.
You're obliged to reply to them.
Yeah.
I worked for an institution at one point, and the policy was don't acknowledge it. Don't ask them for more and more and more, because they probably won't come back and question why they haven't heard from you. And we have too many applications to deal with, so let it sit. If they pester, if they come back, then, slowly, you kind of just give them the long goodbye was the policy. Unofficial policy, but that was the policy.
Has anyone run into any situations, we've seen this a couple times with Nigeria in particular, where a student's school will register them under whatever their name is at the school for YA, and then you'll get their SAT scores and their passport, and their name is slightly different because it's much longer.
Oh,
So
yeah,
they've gone by
it does
some
happen once
nickname
quite
at their
often.
school.
The name on the document, the school document, is not the same as the name on the passport. The name of the passport is usually longer. It usually includes father's name or family name or something. So sometimes it can really, really get confusing.
What do you do in the case?
They have to match.
They have to match. Exactly. Do you have a process by which they can send you some official documentation so that it does match? Do you ask them for that?
It depends on where they're from. I was talking to this young colleagues the other day. There are people from India, and usually they don't have a last name, so we require them to change their passports and get one of their actual names to become their last name, so we can get them in our system.
They have to change their whole passport?
Yeah, they don't have a last name in the passport.
Yeah, we also encountered the case of an Indian student who only had one name. He did not have last name. So then we didn't even know that it was possible. And then we did find out when she's talking about that there really is a possibility that they simply do not have last name.
Right.
But for our system, not just for the university, but for living in Italy, you get generated tax code, which is also your health insurance, which allows you access to basically everything. You need to have a name and a last name to be generated all these codes. That would make their life impossible.
So they have to go through the process of getting a last name. Interesting.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah, we give them the possibility to explain. First of all, we know that this might be it might be different from region to region and country to country, so we have to take that into consideration. But we send them we inform them that they have the possibility to either send a formal documentation to prove or to prove these the information or to explain to us, and then we will make an assessment. So for instance, someone mentioned the name of the father, so this is not uncommon in Middle East, in Iraq, in Syria, and so on. So we're not so harsh on that. If we assess it to be reasonable, and we have some knowledge about the context, then we have to, they don't have to.
Yeah, that's what I'm familiar with.
And just to clarify, why we report to the police is that because since we're a government agency, it's when you apply, first of all, you confirm that the information you leave are correct and so on and so forth. But basically, we see it as you're sending us forged documents, and it would damage the credibility of the government if we don't act and report to the police. So we have clear policies on that you have to.
No, I'm curious if any U.S.-based institution or agency has ever done that in terms of like trying to prosecute through mail fraud. And so I should preface that with, I know that there are court cases and about diploma mills and fraudulent credentials in the United States, but typically they're for U.S. citizens or individuals from the United States who are purchasing a fake diploma and practicing whatever skill, and the way they are prosecuted typically is not through forgery as much as it is through mail fraud. So if something gets mailed from one place to another using the U.S. Postal Service and it's a fraudulent document, that is the charges that they can be prosecuted under. But I have not heard much about international credentials being tracked down and prosecuted through any.
Well, I know it,
unless it's like a large batch.
when I used to work for Educational Credential Evaluators, Inc., which has a lot of people at the conference, and they used to notify the FBI and the U.S. Immigration Service, INS, as it was then known, USCIS now. But I don't think that the law enforcement agencies on either end, immigration or federal, ever really followed up on these things, just because of a human resources, deficiency issue. So, I just have a general question for anyone who wants to chime in. When you're getting documents from secondary school, are you usually getting them through the mail directly from the institution? When it's not, let's say, a refugee or asylee situation, is that how you're getting documents, or are students sending originals to you? How are people getting documents?
We have an application portal, so when they apply, they can upload documents.
So they are making a scan of their own document and uploading it?
Not necessarily. It doesn't make a scan of the documents. That's up to us to do.
But how are they uploading the document?
Through the application portal, but it's just uploading it, and then we look at the documents. And for some countries, we ask them to send the documents directly to us.
Right, but so if they're uploading the document, if they have their physical document, they've got to make a copy and upload it, yeah?
Yeah. For that, it's not secure, but for some countries, we do ask them to directly send the documents, and that's how we verify it. And also, just like we mentioned earlier, that they get a notification when they apply to those who send the documents directly, that we will be checking the documents, and if it's original or not, then if it's not, then they will be, we will contact the police. Yeah.
And the only other question we were going to ask at the end of this one was, about requiring apostille or other official stamps. Is that required or not required, depending on who's getting them? Are you getting officially ministry?
We require it. If it's in foreign language, that, as I told you, we require official stamp by the court interpreter. and if it's in our language or any of the languages which are similar to ours, then we require either a stamp by the school, but the original one, or by the public notary.
So a public notary is sufficient.
Public notary only for those documents that do not have to be translated. If they have to be translated, then we acknowledge only the court interpreter. Not just any translator, but court interpreter. Because that's what's considered the official person with the official authority to translate the document and to verify its authenticity.
And you need an apostille.
Well, we need, it depends on country to country.
On what country?
I mean, here, regarding the stamps, about the translations, if we're speaking about upper secondary education, the documents have to be in any of the Scandinavian languages or English or German language. But when we speak about university documents, we are always speaking English. So, and depending on the country, different stamps are required. So it has to be what we issue in law, and there are also different documentation we use.
So Swedish or English for university level?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
But secondary will take German as well,
Yeah.
or French. Or something.
And the Scandinavian.
Or maybe Scandinavian. Sure. All right, we are going to move on a little bit from fraud and have some more of this discussion, I hope, amongst everybody, because I really think that this is where a lot of the learning is taking place. And we're going to talk a little bit about some theoretical questions, maybe have some debates. We're kind of talking about like the outliers here, right? So we've talked a lot about secondary education systems, commonalities, ideas, but now we want to really drive home like all of the outliers. So, for example, external examinations like this one. Has anyone ever seen this before? You've seen with the E on top. So I had never seen the Learning Resource Network before as an issuing body of anything. And I've seen some questions like Jason. So
this is a rather new examining board that issues the IGCSE, International General Certificate of Secondary Education. They also administer A levels now internationally. So they're one of the recognized boards here. In this case, Joe Bloggs is not the real person's name. That's kind of John Doe, or fill in your country's anonymous, name placeholder. Just as ABC School is not a real school, but this is a sample document from the actual examining board, and this is just an example of what we might see an external examination board that isn't common,
unfamiliar.
Yeah, but I think it's, you're going to be seeing these. Traditionally, they were involved in kind of non-traditional school leavers who had either done home study or radio, TV, whatever the delivery system was. So this is on part. So there's a whole. So the UK and the international GCSEs, and Wales, everyone kind of moved to this new 9-point grade system. But there are some differences in how it's applied in Wales. We won't go into those, but this is consistent with the newer documents that are graded on that 9 descending scale. So this was just an example of what you might see. This,
I think, is a non-academic secondary.
Yeah. So this is just from our. This document here corresponded to, we saw the diploma for this earlier. This is kind of a secondary / post-secondary conglomeration credential. In India, after grade 10, although you can also do it after grade 12. After grade 10, you could go into a diploma in engineering program in various branches of engineering. These were designed not to lead to university. The purpose for these was to take the pressure off of universities because everybody wanted to be an engineer. And it was one of the ways that you could, get money for one thing. But they couldn't accommodate, they just didn't have the places for engineers. So this technical education system was set up to train technicians. And it really backfired in the sense that people didn't use it to go out into the workforce as much as they were trying to use it as a springboard to university. And so after you complete Standard 10, get your secondary school certificate or a matric certificate in Tamil Nadu, you would go in all the states had these programs, you'd go into a 3-year program. They were all called engineering except for there was a computer technology program which was, didn't say engineering in the title. But whatever the branch of engineering, you would go and do this program. And if you, for one thing, it's a little cheaper than going to a private school, right, to do grades 11 and 12. These are subsidized programs that were less expensive. So you would go to a polytechnic college and study for these. And it's one way to get around the grade 12 requirement. And if you got a first division or first division with distinction grade, that was kind of the overall requirement. Rebecca was telling about instances where she saw people getting with second class and lower. But anyway, you would get into either a truncated part-time 4-year Bachelor of Engineering program at an Indian university, or you would just be directly admitted to the second year of the 4-year Indian Bachelor of Engineering, Bachelor of Technology program. And what's interesting is that, and this is an interesting document, number one, because I redacted the age here, but this student is the right age to be in this program, 16, 17. So after grade 10, they did 1 year of one of these kind of technology engineering diplomas somewhere else, and maybe in another stream, and then they switched. It could have been another state, or it could have been within Tamil Nadu state, and they did electronics and communication versus computer engineering. Whatever the case was, it was exempted from that first year, which is common in India. You do like a first year and then semester-wise for the degree exams. Increasingly not common to have all the marks for 1 year on one and then go breaking into semesters.
So this is not a 5-year
much
transcript.
More, yeah,
this
much
is
more
a
of a
3-year
semester,
transcript.
much more of a semester system. But anyway, the theoretical issues here come in terms of if you were admitting to someone.
Well, if you were seeing this by itself, is it secondary, or is it secondary and higher ed? Does the student have a secondary credential with just this alone? And,
Right.
and whether or not they're qualified for entry into if you're working at a higher ed institution, are they eligible for entry? If you're working at just a recognition body, do they have that secondary level credential with just this? Knowing that this is something that they would probably use to go into higher ed in India, they would receive credit for those final 4 semesters as university. University, usually the second year, or
See,
third year. Yeah. So an engineering student might go, if they received this diploma, right?
I was thinking like if this student, for example, wants to study literature.
Not admissible.
Not admissible.
So this is just kind of within the realm of tech. You would see technical streams in other countries where you can get to university with the so-called non-academic technical diploma, but only in a certain area. There are lots of examples of this where your technical high school could get you into engineering school, but it can't get you into the humanities course. It's the same thing with this one. The further kind of theoretical question on this one is that if this student went to university, which this student did, because this student later did go to Anna University and complete a bachelor's degree in engineering, but they're getting credit at the university level for the grade 11 level. It's just a little vagary. They're not getting credit for those, semesters 3, 4, 5, and 6. Those are engineering technology things, and you're going to study engineering later at the university. But so this is a way to get credit for, grade 11 and 12 mathematics and have it replace the first year of university mathematics and physics and chemistry. So it's just as a theoretical model, it has a lot of
There's a lot going on.
Interesting things there.
There's a lot
But
going on
for instance, if this person had only completed, let's say, 2 years of the diploma program, so 10 years plus 2, I don't know anyone who would just say, well, they've completed great 12 years of education. That's comparable to our 12-year high school or primary secondary sequence. In this case, unless you get the full diploma after grade 13, you really haven't completed what we would call, secondary school in India even. So we might say the same thing here, but it's just something to think about.
But they really don't have access to other types of higher ed and education with this, no.
That's my concern. I submitted a question about this document to TAICEP a couple of weeks ago, and the student, is in progress, so they haven't applied yet. We don't have an engineering degree, a bachelor's degree in engineering.
Right.
I don't know what we were doing. It was computer engineering, so computer science. When we just got his application, he applied for political science.
Right.
So not really.
So does he, that's what I'm saying, right? Is this a secondary leaving qualification? Does the student have enough secondary level general knowledge and experience to go into your institution for anything?
I'm still waiting on the actual transcripts. We just have the certificate.
Right.
So I'm hoping to see what courses. And like the maths and sciences and English, that's the CPC, the College Preparatory Core requirements we're asking for. Because if you took social sciences in year 10,
then you can have the qualifications that you need for high school.
The AcroEdge, database that I referred to earlier, which is, for one thing, the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services relies on the information in EDGE quite a bit. They do say represents completion of education comparable to senior high school in the United States, plus an additional up to 1 year of credit on a course-by-course basis. So the advice to admissions officers in the U.S., through the International Education Standards Committee at ACRO, is that it's a high school diploma. Whether or not it's suitable, for you don't have a lot of political science content in your high school in the United States anyway, so it's a very special credential, and that's why it's in here, and it just has opportunity for thought.
it's so easy to change your major in the United States.
Right.
In the United States, it's very easy to change your major.
No, what I'm saying is he could apply as an engineering major,
But in
to
India,
school and then change it.
In India, it's not so easy. All right, so we have about 10 minutes before our next break. So I want to talk about some other alternatives that the slide did not actually make it into. It looks blank on your, I know. Okay, so basically some other, maybe we'll break early, unless anyone has particularly strong feelings about some of these topics. Someone asked about homeschooling earlier, right? So alternative secondary education, I'm just going to run through the list of 5, and we can talk a little bit about it. But homeschooling, sometimes without transcripts or without recognized transcripts from any body other than mom, external exam private students, as we talked about with the West African Examination Council, if you're taking an external exam. And that could be, you know, they're offered in India, in Korea, not the US GED, that private organization that runs the GED actually administers it around the world. So students can take GED, what if they're from, you know, Indonesia and they submit a US GED. Concepts of academic standing or academic credit, right? So you've mentioned the IB, the International Baccalaureate Diploma a little bit, the US Advanced Placement Examinations, the A-levels in many places in the United States are considered for advanced standing within the university. So
Abitur.
the Abitur, right? If you're looking at that, either year counting, when are secondary credentials given advancement for a higher level? When are they a blend of both secondary and higher ed? And then also transnational school systems and schools. So, and we mentioned it very briefly earlier, the Canadian schools in China. So Ontario Ministry of Education has some schools that you can just take an Ontario secondary diploma system, and in a couple of other countries, China predominantly. So these are all those big question. Is it secondary? Does it count? Do you consider it a secondary? What do you do with it? How do you recognize it? How do you treat it for higher ed admission? How do you treat it for whatever purposes that you're doing the evaluation for? So I'll open that up to questions or comments.
Before anyone chimes in, I don't want to leave out the Maturita. And, very commonly, 1 year of advanced standing at universities in the U.S. Are awarded for the Italian, state exam at the end of grade 13. I don't want the table to feel like we were mentioning that one. That's very common, and it's up to the university, of course. A university can say, we don't give advanced standing to anyone's upper secondary diploma. Other people are quite happy to do it. It's just universities are autonomous and they don't have to, there's no national framework as we say. In fact, there's a TAICEP movement to create a U.S. national framework just so that there is one, although it wouldn't be a government
And I'll say in
framework.
terms of advanced standing and credit, probably 15 years ago, 13, 14 years ago, I was working at a credential evaluation agency, and I was on the phone with a woman from, I believe, Bulgaria, who was absolutely livid with me because I evaluated her secondary education documents as secondary education and not as U.S. university level education. And I couldn't understand why she would be so upset. She was very, very upset. And her rationale was that the schools are so much more difficult in my country than they are in your country. So why can't you give me more advanced standing?
We hear it at least once a week.
Every day. Okay. All right. But my schools are so much more difficult than
Our
yours.
system is so much more difficult.
Our system is, we have much higher math levels. We do this, we do that. Right? It's. I think everybody hears it. So, my response to that was, look, at the end of the day, a bachelor degree from Harvard University is the same level as a bachelor degree from local state university around the corner. It's still a bachelor level degree. It's how, your performance in it might be different, right? Your network might be more impressed with the degree from a place, right? Your networking, your social network might be expanded by that higher level degree. It might be more difficult to get that degree, but it's still the same level, right? So I don't give advanced standing for more difficult secondary systems. it's a very tricky, finessed area.
Yeah, we always respond that we make our decisions based on facts and not based on someone's subjective interpretation.
Just because it was more difficult for you doesn't mean it's more difficult for me. I would have done this fine.
Interesting anecdote. There was one of the deans of international education, in the 60s through the early 90s was a guy named G. James Haas. He went by Jim from Indiana University, later of the Purdue University of Indiana campus. But his response to people who would say that, but my friend was given credit for his secondary certificate, and he would just shut them down and say, well, we don't make that mistake anymore. He was a very trim little compact Marine with a crew cut, until, no matter what age, his hair was always the same. He said, well, we don't make that mistake anymore. And it seemed to me a perfect response to, the people that try to plead their case.
There were questions about homeschooling, and some interest in talking about homeschooling. What are the questions that people have about the concept of homeschooling? Is it just U.S.-based homeschooling that you're curious about? So there's actually some countries where homeschooling is not legal, and there are plenty of countries where homeschooling is perfectly legal and in different formats and different levels of approval. I, off the top of my head, don't have that list, but I can get it.
India has a new, fairly new examination board for secondary school for students that were educated in the home, and that seems fantastic to me. But there is kind of a long-standing distance education history in India, so maybe that contributed to this. But just from a kind of historical perspective, it was unthinkable in the United States not very many years ago that you would educate your child in the home. It wasn't, I'm not saying.
We could get into fisticuffs here, Dave. I'm not sure that it was unthinkable.
It wasn't considered, let's say,
it's
normal
become
every
more
day.
mainstream.
It's much more mainstream.
It has become more mainstream. In different states of the United States, it is more mainstream than other states, and that is based on a number of things. Distance to getting into, to get to a particular school building. Religion has played a big part in the uprising of homeschooling, and the radicalization of religion has definitely played a part in homeschooling in the United States. Recognition of alternative learning styles and learning needs has also made it more pronounced and more prominent in the U.S. Some states don't pay any attention to the process, and kids will literally get forgotten about in systems. We hear about it on the news, 10 kids rescued and they had been homeschooled. And so it creates a very negative atmosphere about it. And in other states, it's very highly regulated, and homeschools are seen as private schools. So they have to go through the same private school approval process in the local district. Depends on the state. It depends on the state, and then even more dialed down, it can depend on the local school district within that state. So I can really speak very personally to the state of Massachusetts and the municipalities where I have lived. The state of Massachusetts is one that's, for some reason, is seen as unfriendly to homeschooling. I don't know that that's the case. I think it's unfriendly because it's regulated. Regulation is seen as unfriendly for some reason. So parents in Massachusetts are required to submit a letter of homeschool intent to their local school district, and that needs to include on it the curriculum which will be followed, including the number of hours. It needs to include materials that will be used, and it needs to include the teacher and their qualifications. So a homeschool student does not have to necessarily be taught by their parent. They could have private tutors, they could have online classes, they could have, any number of things. And so that needs to be listed. There don't need to be any specific qualifications. You don't need to say, well, this person is going to be the homeschool teacher and they have a teaching license. They don't even need to have a degree. They just need to say, I'm qualified because I'm their parent, or I'm qualified because of whatever reason. That letter of intent goes to the local school district. If the local school district authority decides that they don't want to accept it, it's actually, the burden is on them to prove why, and why the qualifications don't meet their standards. And then it can become a back and forth between the parent, the local school district, and the local elected school board administration. It's a convoluted process.
Getting your children to study through this system, and what are the cons? Like, what happens to them after when they want to go to a university, for instance?
In the United States, because it's becoming more prominent, you'll actually see U.S. universities listing on their admissions web pages. If you are a first-year student from a public school, click here. If you're a first-year student from a private school, click here. If you're a first-year student who has been homeschooled, here's your information that you need to submit. If you're an international student, this is the information you need to submit. It's becoming more and more common to the point where universities just simply know what to ask for.
I think when the first batch of, let's say, more than just a smattering of homeschooled students started hitting university in the United States, you would see
within the past 10 years.
Yeah, professors would be writing op-eds and saying, I was skeptical about homeschooled children, but now I'm skeptical about the other students because, we were told they weren't going to be highly socialized. They're extremely able to talk to adults. They're fine with their peers. They're doing really good work. I mean, that's, I think, what changed opinion, just in my perception, is that when these students hit university and the professors are saying, these are good students, these students have been working on research projects, from a young age, often, under the tutelage of PhDs and things, because, different parent groups had different resources to get their students involved in things, and science competitions and mathematics Olympiads and all the rest. So I think that's when the perception changed, at least as far as I'm concerned, is when you had university personnel saying what we had feared about homeschool education isn't true. Now that's
not much different.
They're seeing people coming to university,
Right.
though. They're not seeing the other kids
Right.
that
And
are,
that's, to be honest, that's not much different than schools seeing the perception of the assessment scales at different national levels and saying, okay, well, in the past we wouldn't accept students with the CXC unless it was this, this high level. And now what we've seen is, oh wow, these students are really succeeding. They're doing well in our classrooms. They're doing well socially. We don't need to have that highest level of assessment of grades for those students to come into our university and be accepted. Or, students from sort of the alternative exams, students who are taking the GED. Wow, these students are performing well, so we can change our perception, we can change our admission policy. And I would say it's the same. Homeschool, external exams, GEDs, non-traditional secondary education methodologies they have to prove themselves, right? But once they do prove themselves, it becomes easier for students to go through those non-traditional, those alternative methods and gain access to higher ed and then to other things as well. It's a recognition. Not much different than when what we do as credential evaluators, right? We talked about that gatekeeping process. Once you get through the gate and you prove yourself, it kind of opens the door for the others behind you to be able to do that.
On our website, like the Georgia State University website, we have a homeschool tab, and I have never had an international applicant so far that's been homeschooled that didn't take an exam. So like they were homeschooled, but they sat for IBCSs. So they sat them as a private candidate. But for domestic, they have to submit an intensive portfolio. Like they have to list every class that they took in high school, what basically their assignments, their books that they use, you know, any research or essays that they did. It's
extensive, but they
20
probably
pages.
already have it anyway because they had to submit it in order to get approval from their local authorities.
So they've definitely vet to make sure it's like, okay, so this student definitely, like, they took the equivalent of like geometry, pre-algebra, algebra. So
And the idea for as a credential evaluators to say, okay, if you can do this with a student who's homeschooling, you can do it with a refugee who's come into this country without documentation. Apply what you're getting, what you're using for one alternative methodology, one alternative assessment, and put it to the other and think about, can that be transferred? Can I think about how I assess and determine comparability for the student in this situation? Can it be applied to this other situation? And for secondary levels, I think that is really important and something that we can think about doing. We have a break. We have about 15 minutes. When we come back, the goal is for us to have some credentials for you to look at, for you to talk about, make some determinations. I will say this, most people at most tables may have a phone. I'm going to try to put the credentials up in QR code format so that you can scan it, have it, talk about it in little groups. So the break might be a little extra long so that I can figure out how I'm doing that. We'll see. But come on in after about 15 minutes. And if you don't have a device at your table, find a friend. Join another table.
So about 3:20.
Yeah, about 3:20, we'll say.
All right.
I realized I couldn't do it while you were working.